let's start with topic numero uno. This has been one that we've been sitting on for a hot minute, something that we've been super interested in thinking about, and it was part of the backbone for generating this project in the first place, which was thinking about this relationship between teaching and gaming, specifically for us in the context of like what it means to be a gamer and also an educator, because I think it comes with a lot of different approaches and techniques that aren't common to academia and also aren't really common to gaming. I think you like become way more critical of the gaming space, you know, in general. And so one of the things that kind of like inspired wanting to do this talk this week was last week before the weekend started, I was playing music before my students came into the Zoom classroom, as I like to do, so it's not just like a quiet dark void in there for them. And I happened to be listening to the Fall Guys playlist, which I love because it's very happy and enjoyable. And one of my students, you know, before class starts, goes into the chat and is like, "Oh, professor, how much Fall Guys like do you play? Have you won a crown yet?" Like, you know, and asking me all this stuff about the game. And I was like, "Oh, that's kind of cute and fun. Like, you must also play Fall Guys." And so, you know, we're like chatting about the game and the comedy that is. And then we start talking about other games that are like similar that have come up recently. And, you know, it was a really nice bonding experience and moment that I feel like is completely impossible without that background knowledge, right? And I've had a similar experience with students in the past when I wear like one of my Moment of Triumph shirts, or even like a gaming T-shirt or anything that's like relative to that culture. If I make a reference to something in class, for example, or I use like a bit of gaming vernacular that is just like super uncommon for most conversation, and a bunch of students like laugh and get it, I'm like, wow, that was super fun, and I'm glad that that happened. But I understand wholeheartedly that that is not a common experience for most educators, right? That's like super niche, and it has a lot to do with the fact that I'm not as old as a lot of people in academia, and just the generation that have that I exist in, right? So I think the big, broad, sweeping question for this topic is like, what role could, or should gaming play in teaching? And so, what I want to open with, Reese, is to pose to you this question: when was the first time you actually encountered gaming, just in you know in quotations, gaming, in school? You don't know? You are not speaking audibly enough for the mic to hear you. Nope. Um, is your computer trying to connect to your Bluetooth headset at the same time? Because maybe that's what's messing it up.
No, I don't have a Bluetooth headset. Can you hear me now?
I can, yeah.
All right, then maybe we just go with the built-in. My 840s are having it done.
Um,
Um,
can you not do audio in your headset and then mic through the thing? Does it just get confused?
no, no.
Okay, that's fine.
Um, I mean, I distinctly remember like getting punished for catching Pokemon like during class when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Um, but I think the first time that like gaming was an integral part of my learning was actually when I went to boarding school. We had a Super Nintendo, and it was the only console that we could have. Like, no, you couldn't bring a TV, you couldn't bring anything. Um, but the dorm had a Super Nintendo, and we had Mario World, and it was basically like the dorm came together to beat the cartridge, and when we got to the end, to the last castle, we reset and we did it all over again.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't like a part of my education. That was just integral to my experience at an educational institution. I don't know that, like in my classroom experience, I don't think that it's ever been a part of it for me, like as a student.
Right. And that's how I feel too. I feel like the only memory I have is like the substitute teacher. We are having like a day off of classes or something, and like I distinctly remember in like early middle school playing like Oregon Trail, like on a day where there's just like a sub who's like, I have no lesson plan. There's nothing for you to do. like play this game on your like 19 Windows 97 computer where like you just travel through America and like make decisions about your caravan, right? Which is like a weird sort of relationship to like navigate with no context, right? But that's like the only time I can remember playing a game as part of school, and even then it was like a haphazard after the fact addition where they're just like, oh shit, you know, like we have nothing else for you to do, so here's this thing, right? And it's confusing to me because I know now that as I've seen like my siblings grow up and as I see like schools as they develop now, like gaming in different forms and functions became really part of education, right? And I feel like it's weird because it falls off from when you're a child and like everything has to be a game, otherwise you can't learn, right? Because you're just not interested if it's not a game of some flavor, if it's not fun and interactive, right? And then that just falls off hard. And like you said, like you're just used to being punished for, you know, playing Pokemon or playing whatever it's going to be with your friends rather than focusing. It's always seen as a distraction. But gaming has been used by a lot of things like the military. What up, Ace? Um, and
Oh, what up?
by a number of different corporate, like even, you know, Pokemon Go, like really is like not a teaching resource, but it was like gaming can be applied to so many different aspects of life that people hadn't thought of before, right? And so like knowing that the military has always used like flight simulators and mil sims and things of that nature to like adapt um, recruits to war and the things that come with it, right? Like I wonder why gaming isn't more prominent in the academic space. I think it's becoming that way, but like, is it just the fact that it's seen as like a leisure activity that people are like, there's no educational value to it in any way, shape, or form?
Hmm. Um, am I coming in okay now?
Mm-hmm.
I just fiddled quickly with my input and output settings. Hopefully this works. Um, I think part of it is that like there are not a lot of gamers in not just that like not the ed space. There are a lot of gamers who are teachers and educators. I don't think that there are a lot of gamers who are pedagogues, right? Who are thinking about like the praxis and philosophy of teaching. And so I think that what happens is like when there's that confluence of teaching and gaming, the end product is a bad version of both, right? It's not a game that has replayability, that has like cultural standing, and then in terms of like its pedagogical value, like the ability of like students to retain data and information to ultimately achieve some level of like self-actualization, the tool falls short. And so I think that part of the issue is that what we have right now is that the few modalities that sort of straddle these spaces of education and gaming are like edutainment. And so they're cheap versions of both, right? They don't satisfy in any way. Like for me, one of the things that comes to mind immediately is Kahoot, right? These like ready-made kind of like little pop quizzes um, that I don't use a lot of, um, which isn't to say that I don't ever use it. Um, and part of it is like it becomes like the path of least resistance, right? And I think that there's an urge to find that now in a moment where lots of people are sick and fucking tired of Zoom. I was actually talking to Sophie about it yesterday. She was like, there's just like palpable disaffection, and she's an artist, right? So I can't even imagine, like, that's not even my space. I can't imagine trying to do the work that she does with kids at a distance. And so there's something like so disaffecting about virtual learning and distance learning, especially if you never signed up for this shit. Um, that like something like Kahoot becomes this like easy inroad of like keeping people plugged in and keeping folks' cameras on. And so like I don't know, it feels like a tool that actually like lowers the bar and isn't memorable in any way, shape, or form, and then doesn't like I don't know of any evidence that says that like more Kahoots leads to like retention and recall.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that there are more gamers who are academics. I think there are more gamers who are teachers. We actually just hired a religion teacher who's like a hardcore gamer. But how many gamers are pedagogues who are leading like on that like frontier of what teaching could look like. I don't know, dog.
Yeah, and I think you raised like a really interesting point, right? That there's like a time component to it, there's a tech component to it, um, and so I was reading this article that came out of UPenn because apparently there's a graduate course there called Video Games and Virtual Worlds as Sites of Learning and Engagement, which sounds pretty dope actually, and it's in their School of Education, and the person who developed the course like argues essentially that part of the reason that gaming like in its pedagogical form isn't part of the classroom is one because there's just like there's always the access part which is hard, right? Like, and we think about COVID and how like we've forced people to find tech and internet access because otherwise they can't get to their education, right? So there's always been that issue. And the other one is like or the other side of that coin then is like there's also like not a lot of investment in technology, right? Like most schools are like, well, why do we want to pay for game consoles or high-end PCs or things of that nature when we don't see them as like useful tools? Like money could be put somewhere else. And like you said, there aren't a lot of people who are like savvy with the tech, right? To like know what you can do with this stuff to make it more useful than just like, oh, it's just playing a game, right? To think about it more critically than just like it's just playing a game, right? And I think probably one of the greatest things that comes out of this article that I read was like acknowledging that you can't learn something in 45 minutes. And I think that's part of the problem with things like Kahoot and all those other like edutainment type services is like you're playing like a mini game for the purpose of like retention briefly, but it doesn't work, right? Like, and this is something I think I struggle with just in general, right? My classes are 50 minutes, and it's hard to convey information in 50 minutes, right? Like, thank God for graduate courses that are, hours long, where you're just like, all right, we're going to sit with this and work really hard to understand, like, one article, one book, whatever it's going to be that was due for that day, and just focus.
And I think that in the time of COVID, it's even, like, the bar's even lower than that. It's not even merely retention for short-term recall on a quiz, right? Which is like, I think most of us would recognize as like the lowest form of learning. But it's also like, I think right now the bar is so low, we do things like Kahoot for just engagement. Like I mean, dude, okay, this summer was case in point. Nobody had their cameras on. Like the conversation was lit, but it's like talking into a fucking empty room. Like as a teacher, that's so deflating. And like, don't get me wrong, like our homegirl, our Lenny, like she was lit, and there were so many other kids who were really into what we did that summer, and that was great. But when I'm teaching in flesh and blood, I'm in the lecture hall, I'm pacing, I'm screaming, I'm getting into it with kids. There's music, like it's just such a dynamic environment, and there's something like about like the viscous affective charge of teaching, of working with people in meet space that like is hard to recuperate or even approximate in Zoom. And so I think the bar is like it's not just that the tools don't let us do something cool and like elevate the bar of what teaching can look like. It's that the fucking metric of what a successful Zoom class is shit. It's so low right now. And not for nothing, like not to shit on the boomers, bro, but I think that there's also, and I guess I kind of get it, but there's like a resentment too about like having to learn all of these tools. Right?
Absolutely.
So,
I think to the fact that that JP was telling us about like having to give elementary school
like
teachers
Google
a Google
search.
literacy quiz. Like you need to get certified to use really basic technology.
Yeah.
Like that's wild to me. And they gripe and they complain and they're like, oh, I don't want to do this. Like it's so hard and it's annoying and like what's the point? And then they still can't figure it out. And it's like if you can't get them to rock with the basic tech, right? To just learn how to use a Google Doc or a Google shared drive, right? Then how could you ever possibly convince them to up their teaching game to pass just talking to that blank void, right? Just being like, I'm just gonna lecture, and it's gonna end, or I'm just gonna record myself lecturing, and that's the whole thing, and we keep moving on.
And I think that that's particularly pernicious, Mothman, in environments like the ones that you're and I are in, right? I'm at a private school, and you're at a university, like university, especially like large land grant universities, do not give a single fuck about teaching, right? And lots of the faculty members who are hired at those R1, R2 schools, teaching is a chore, right? Teaching for many people is an afterthought, and nobody is trained as a teacher. And so you're asking, and that's just the truth of like undergraduate education right now. You're asking a cohort of people, the vast majority of which don't give a shit about undergraduate teaching, which is why they kick that work to people like you and I, to learn all of these new modalities for the shitty, for what they think of as the shittiest part of their job. It's an uphill battle. And then people like you and I are saying like, wait, like there's actually some super dope shit that we could do with this. Like the amount of pushback that I got from for just saying like, y'all know that Discord's a thing, right?
Yep.
Like y'all know that we could teach on Discord. We wouldn't be the first people to do it. And they were like, bah, humbug, don't fucking say shit like that. Like, we're doing Zoom. Oh, yeah, all right. Like, people got sick, and me and Nate, who's one of the esports coaches, were like, guys, there are all these tools. Like, Reese and I can teach you. And they were, no. Oh, okay, all right, whatever. And then now, I think one of the other challenges, too, is like, because so many of us are into uncharted territory, those of us who are like, well, actually, like Zoom's a better tool. Can I just use that? Now we're in a place where people are like, no, 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 no. Everything's uncharted. So don't go bushwhacking, teaching new shit to these kids. Stay the course. Don't be innovative. This is uncharted for everybody. And it's like, well, the play's uncharted, but like I actually kind of know what I'm doing right now. And so it's like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. We're in this weird place where like innovation isn't welcome. I don't know. It's kind of fucking like I'm struggling to name it.
No, and I think
The weird
you're
funkiness
right.
of teaching in Zoom.
I think you're right. I think even just having, and I think you touched on this. I think it was the core issue that we have with it is that like we bring that knowledge base that has come from just existing in digital space for so long and playing our games here and finding ways to make these things work, right? And finding the sites and the programs and all the stuff that you need to like get things off the ground. And then wanting to use that knowledge to improve the way that we teach. But then having the academy say, well, no, that like none of us know what that is, can figure it out. It's uncharted, and so we should just work with whatever we know, or more likely, at least in my case, whatever we signed a contract with, right? As like just work with what we paid for. And I'm like, but you could have just used it for free. Like, Discord is a free service. It's why? Like you don't have to, but whatever, right? And wanting to bring that different mindset to the classroom, I think, is what really bothers the academy, and I think bothers us about it too, just because we can't do it, right? Like we've talked about teaching a gaming course, and I think one of the cool things about this UPenn course that I was reading about is that one of their big projects is that they have to remix a game that exists. So not only do they play games as part of their learning, like major titles, not like willy-nilly like nonsense education games. Like they sit and pick like games with stories and content and whatever that they will play through,
like a canonical games,
both digital and like physical board games and stuff of that nature. And then they have to also, as a like course project, remix one of those games. So like they get to take a board game and like change the rules, and they have to like, change what the objective of that is, right? Which breaks down like the core of gamifying something, which is like, all right, if to gamify something is to sort of like turn it into a behavioral modification tool, right? Then being able to practice how to do that is a really useful skill that I feel like academics forget, right? One of the reasons games are so fun is because you get just completely enamored with the world, the mechanics, the tech, right? Like it has a bunch of different things that make it interesting, right? And I honestly, I feel like academia misses that a lot. Like it misses the mark in so many ways where like if I could just get someone to play through like a horror game that conveyed the information that I need to convey, I feel like they'd retain it so much better than me just screaming it at them.
You know, and I've been struggling to like articulate that, because so there was a time where the school I work at was thinking about and playing with ideas in project-based learning, and I don't have the time to like go into that for our viewers. But if you're interested, go check out the Bug Institute. I got trained by them a couple summers ago. The things that they do are super, super cool. If you're an educator, even if you're not at a PBL school, like the shit they do is super dope and worth checking out. And so we were looking like as a part of this PD about like, hey, what's PBL? Like, what could that look like in the context of our school? We looked at these other schools that were full PBL. Everything, top to bottom, every subject was project-based learning, where like the content is delivered through projects. And that was like super compelling and looked super dynamic. And I'm thinking with like my ethnographer brain on, I'm like, what if peace and justice was just a fucking ethnography?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like we're moving across the city of Philadelphia, like doing service projects and interviewing people and like going to community centers, right? Like my brain was going in all kinds of different directions. And there was one school where I'm watching this like World Civ project where these kids have to build a model about like the rise and fall of these three empires. And what rubbed me the wrong way about it was that really it was an engineering project and the nodes were fundamentally like irrelevant. They were so much more caught up in like how the pieces moved than the intricacies of like the political historical relationships that they were meant to be mapping, that it felt like this is a project for the sake of a project.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This is a square peg in a round hole. I'm not seeing the value added here. And there's a part of me that says, if you want to learn Marx, you get black coffee, you get good headphones, and you sit down and you fucking read Marx, right? That there's no corner cut, which isn't to call PBL corner cutting, right? But you have to reckon with Marx's Marx to get at his ideas, right? And that like there's only so much David Harvey I could read before eventually I'm called to read Das Kapital myself. That's my take, right? And I'm a theory guy. Maybe other people disagree, but as I hear you speak, as I heard you share that idea about the horror game, I thought immediately of BioShock. If you're reading Ayn Rand in a lit class,
Yep.
it makes perfect sense to play BioShock.
Yep.
You want to teach that text? It's a perfect complement, right? Because it pulls so deeply from those ideas. Which isn't to say that like you play BioShock instead of reading Ayn Rand, but that it can supplement that, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know. I feel like we could be imaginative, and I think that, and I think there's more to be done in the gaming and teaching space outside of just gaming being content. I'm more interested in seeing how gaming can become a modality. But I think one of the challenges, and I'm sensitive to time, so maybe we just leave this on the table. It's up to you. But I'd be curious to hear, Mothman, how you felt about your grades and your grade curve at the end of the spring. I'm not like the harshest grader, but at this spring there was like a significant inflation in my grades. And I think part of it was like I'm teaching to this like these shifting tides, and I imagine lots of other people was looking for consistency in the path of least resistance as I was trying to find my way. And so I guess my question, like for the people who inherit this, like the educators who inherit this question long after us, is like, what does rigor look like, right? What do standard, not standardization, but what, like in a moment where gaming is a modality, what are the metrics? What are the benchmarks for excellence? I don't know, man.
So I'll offer this, and maybe this will be my final thought, because I think you're right. It's dangerous, especially to people who are like stalwart advocates of the black coffee headphones and just doing the fucking work approach, right? Like to say that playing a game could be content, even in like a class where you're doing like programming and you're trying to break down that game and to understand how it was built, right?
Mm-hmm.
That it's weird when it's the content, but at the same time, right, like what ends up happening if you do it in a way similar to a graduate seminar where it's it's, so in the lit example, right? If you're required to both read Atlas Shrugged and play BioShock outside of class time, right? Because I feel like for a lot of people, like they see the game as like something they would have to do as a class. Otherwise, they feel like people wouldn't do it, wouldn't be engaged in it, or whatever, right? But if you could extend class time outside of like the brick and mortar sense, where you're just like, on your own, play through this thing, read this book, and class is solely dedicated to figuring out how they work, to making sense of how someone took this traditional text and converted it into a digital format and told you a story that helped you understand, what the main points were. Because that might be the way that you sort of bridge the gap, right? To sort of help gaming leave that leisure space and become a tool, right? To become something that is a positive force for comprehension, right? Because I would argue that you could make somebody play like, I don't know, fucking Diablo, and do it in a stats class, and have them try to figure out the math for how that game works.
Yeah.
Like
how to min max a war.
Seriously, could you like see? But that's the thing, because I think about like, to round out my point, I think about like when you approach stuff as a gamer, and the games that I played, and the way that my brain works when I'm playing games. Like I've had Hoagie joke about when we started playing Warzone, and he would ask me for a loadout, and I could just recite it to him. And I'm like, one, my retention for information is really high, and I think that's partially because like I've been just storing info for games for decades. But then like min-maxing, doing that math in my head, trying to figure out like all of these weird ways of thinking and articulating information that aren't naturally found in any other space. I feel like that's one of the most powerful tools that gaming has that we don't talk about, right? Not to mention the fact that it serves like really important things for like connection and social emotional work, right? Like imagine just prescribing that your students now all play Animal Crossing together outside of class time. Like, yo, I know we have to come to class and you hate it, but like when we're not together, just go build your island and trade vegetables and fish and shit, and like build community in the way that we, play Xbox together. Just like that work is also super important, and it feels like people devalue it because it's tied to the game. They don't see it as something useful for just like maintaining sanity. Like, how much more stuff like, and that's the thing, I feel like I've learned random shit from you like reading what you're writing while we're playing a game, or us having like a strange philosophical debate in the middle of stuff going on. Like there's some debate. Like, there's some beautiful moments in there for like really just learning something and breaking it down to its like core functions in a space that doesn't require you to be in full learning mode all the time. Right? It like opens up that possibility to learn at any moment. I think that's one of its big useful functions that is being overlooked by all the old fogies that we have to deal with.
I have nothing to add. That's a wonderful note to end this segment on.